Hi, welcome to Story Time with Dan Booker. I appreciate you being here. We're going to start pretty quick. We got two chapters to get through today, so I'm looking forward to this. These are special, especially the second one. That's kind of one of my favorites. I got a lot of those. Okay, this first chapter is Greenville. Talbot was sitting in the lounge of the Greenville Inn. He loved the feeling of the large place. Looked as if it had been a mansion once, with its oak walls, large fireplaces, and plenty of lawn to walk around. It was expensive, but he felt worth the expense. He and were here for the weekends, still trying to make up their minds about moving. Like Sentinel County, it had a forever feeling that it would be the same 100 years from now. Michaela was still asleep and probably would be for an hour more. Larry was staying with Morgan and Julia for the weekend since they were his adopted grandparents and had asked for his company. Michaela came down the staircase dressed to go walking. They could have eaten in the dining room, but they had found a small diner in town that they frequented. Michaela was beginning to realize that Talbot was looking for and clinging to all the places that were almost identical to home. She began to wonder if moving was, already starting. She began to wonder if moving was really what Talbot wanted. In fact, she wasn't still sure it was what she wanted. Town was lovely, and though a trifle more upscale, it still retained that small town feeling. It had that warm closeness that she cherished. The folks they passed already knew them and understood that they might be part of the town soon. They had already been accepted, welcomed, and made to feel as if they belonged. Spent the morning at the art museum, then did a bit of shopping. Kayla was having a hard time as she looked around. She kept thinking about Agnes and how they would shop together, and sometimes going to visit Julia or bringing Peggy into the fold and teaching her how they ministered to the sick. It was like an extended family or secret club. Every day they hung out together, planned outings, talked over problems, and generally just enjoyed each other's company. Now she was trying to break away from that. Could she find that kind of friendship here? She decided to see what it was like in church. At home, every church was open all day and night, every day. People would come and go and get that much closer to God, be where they were sure He was listening. The head to the Methodist chapel was being closest to what she was used to. Talbot pulled on the handle in such a way that it showed he expected it to be open. It was not going to open. Next to the door was a list of hours when it would be. This was the first real strike against the town. When Talbot had been having personal troubles, he went to see Pastor Martin or else just to kneel at the altar and pray. Well, it looks like God's not going to be in for a while. Let's try the other churches. All were tightly shut. They found a bench and sat to think. What else of importance would be unavailable? They decided to seek out the mayor, discuss what plans they had for the future, and what that would include the sheriff's office. On the first visit, Talbot had been heartily welcomed. He wondered if that would continue. He asked the secretary if he could see the mayor. Sorry, the mayor doesn't see anyone without an appointment. So he's asking if he'll see me. I'm Sheriff Talbot, and he's asked me to become sheriff here when the next election comes around. He reached for the phone. Sir, the Sheriff Talbot is here and would like to see you, please. She hung up as she informed that the mayor would see him. She offered a seat to Makayla, setting Talbot up alone. In the home, Makayla would have been offered a cup of coffee or something. Here she was told to sit and then ignored. In the mayor's office, Talbot was greeted formally, and while not unfriendly, it wasn't the kind of reception he was used to. Not invited to sit, and the mayor's posture intimated that his time was precious. Talbot got right to the point and asked for the information on future events. Well, I would have thought something like that could have waited until you're situated. He checked the calendar. Nothing you need to concern yourself. I mean, we don't have concerts in the park or ice cream socials. That stuff's all that. Talbot added another mental check on the negative side of the town's attributes. Going downstairs, he saw Makayla outside on a bench. She did not look happy, though she cheered up when she saw him return. Well, what did Rocky have to say? He He said, he ain't no Rocky. He's too important even to ask me to sit when I came in. Let's go for a walk in the park. They walked to Springboro Nature Park and sat near the river. It was peaceful, and the flowers waving in the breeze scented the air. As they relaxed, a cool breeze wafted over them, calming their mental turmoil. Agnes was laying with her head in his lap, her eyes closed against the bright sun filtering through the leaves. In her mind, she went over the town once more, weighing the scales against the town they called home and what she felt Talbot needed. Talbot wanted to be in charge, and maybe working on his own would allow him to feel that way, no matter what he was. No matter what, he was top dog. No one to rely on except himself. Well, if that was what it took to make him happy, she'd make the best of it. Talbot had, after all, brought her a car so that she could drive down and see Agnes anytime she wanted. Well, the thought of driving an hour or so back and forth with Larry fussing in the back seat wasn't exactly a comfortable thought. Talbot's mind was running along similar lines. When he had first been approached to become sheriff of Greenville, he had discussed it with Makayla, and she was all for it. He had spoken often since then of the advantages of working in a smaller town. It would mean more time with her and Larry, more times when she could pop in and visit. She'd been taken by the beauty, the vast forested area surrounding the town. She went on and on about how beautiful it'd be in the fall and how there were hilly areas for Larry to slide down. He was becoming uncomfortable with the thought of moving, but it really seemed to him that Makayla wanted it. Well, that was what it took to make her happy, and then he pushed forward with it. Looked around once more and tried to work out all the positives. Makayla was half asleep doing the same. She was thinking only of what there might be to look forward to. She started listing them aloud, and Talbot listened, just focusing on the positives while he was looking at all the negatives. Said that she might have the right idea and began to look at the place differently. Well, it wasn't home. It could be. Yeah, I thought it definitely could be. The next day was spent wandering up and down side streets looking for houses for sale. One criterion was finding one with a backyard large enough to put all the things that Morgan had bought for Larry: tree house, swing set, and a child's pedal racing car. He thought about things like this, what Morgan was doing for a child that wasn't really his grandchild, but who treated him as such, made a lump come to his throat. He began to feel guilty for taking Larry so far away. True, Morgan and Julia were welcome to any time they wanted to visit, but the times he'd be able to get away this far would be few. Travel was expensive, so he figured that they would have to have enough room for a spare bedroom for visitors. Seeing that finding a home wouldn't be all that hard, they breathed a sigh of relief. That was until they saw the prices. Makayla was trying to work out how much their present home could sell for. No matter how she worked it out, it wasn't going to be enough. She began to softly cry. Talbot took this to mean she was seeing her dream slipping away. Don't worry, we'll find a way to make it work. He had that determined note in his voice that told her that come what may, he'd find a way to get them the house and one in town. Not that they were in the same track, but continually going in different directions. So now we're going to do the next chapter, A Day in the Life. Let me get a drink real quick so I can make it through this. Talbot met Joe at the diner. It was going to be a long day walking around since the squad car was in the shop for a tune-up. After going up to Greenville, Talbot was feeling the need of company, so he decided it would be nice to just walk around and talk with Joe. Walking down where the homes were, they pulled out notebooks and critiqued the flower displays in hopes of sending word to one of the florists to begin a Yard of the Month program. Stopping and writing out the good points of the home that they were in front of, they didn't realize the consternation they were causing. As they passed, stopped, and made notes, folks were certain they were going to receive a ticket for some problem in their yard. Since every yard had a flower garden, the stops were freaking, people were getting worried. As they reached the end of the street and crossed over to the other side and began to work their way back, halfway down the street, Rocky's phone began to ring. People were wanting to know what new rule had been instituted that they weren't aware of. After the 20th call in half an hour, Rocky ran down to see what the heck Talbot was doing. Sweeping down the side road of houses, he found Talbot and Joe standing and annotating in front of a particularly colorful garden. They're talking with the owner and commending them on the beautiful colors and huge blooms. Rocky stood waiting until their effluence of congratulations ceased and he could get a word in. Guys, do you have any idea the chaos you're causing? My phone's been ringing off the hook because people think you're getting ready to write up everyone for some new infraction. They're worried sick that the league institutes some new rule or policy and they don't have a clue what they've done wrong. Joe broke into laughter. Talbot stood open-mouthed and hastened to explain about the Art of the Month program. Rocky laughed. Well, sounds like a good idea, but let someone else do the judging so you don't get folks riled up. He went back to his office in better humor than he'd left it. Continuing on the way, they were halted by Mrs. Bailey, who was running down the street screaming for them to stop. When she arrived next to them, she rested a moment, holding on to Talbot's shoulder while she caught her breath. But she could speak. She brought them up to speed. My daughter's cat is in a tree. Her collar is caught and she's struggling to get free. I'm afraid she'll strangle herself. She ran back home with the two following. She stopped at the front yard tree and pointed upwards. Frisky was indeed trapped, and the way he was thrashing around, he could choke himself in no time. Joe realized there wasn't time to go in search of a ladder. Talbot, get down on a knee and let me stand on your shoulders. When you stand upright, I ought to be able to reach the lower branch. Talbot knelt and Joe stood on his shoulders. With an effort, Talbot rose to full height and stood on his toes to get Joe a little closer. The release of weight and grunt of satisfaction indicated that Joe had reached the limb and pulled himself up. Taking off his shirt, Joe enveloped the struggling feline and loosed up from the branch. Ready? Called down Talbot, who stood ready to catch the still wriggling cat. Ready, let him go. The cat plummeted, howling all the way. Talbot made a soft catch and handed Frisky to his mistress. It took a while to calm him down. Miss Bailey was all thanks. I can't thank you enough. Karen would have been heartbroken if anything happened to Mr. Frisky. He's going to need plenty of tuna to cheer him up after that ordeal. She handed back Joe's shirt and headed back inside. Joe began to climb down and was soon caught on a branch himself. He had one hand on the branch he had descended from and one hand trying to undo his pants from the branch. His upper hand slipped. He turned sideways and upside down, entangling his trousers further. It was a sound of ripping material that grew louder and continued as Joe descended slowly. He was dropping down as his trousers ripped, with only his belt holding things together. Soon he was eye to eye with Talbot, who was almost doubled up laughing. Little help, please? Talbot tried, but wasn't able to be much assistance until his laughter subsided. Now undo your belt and I'll catch you. You sure you've got all your lap out? I don't want to hit my head on the sidewalk. Talbot pushed Joe back upwards to loosen the tension. Joe undid his belt and dropped into Talbot's arms. My hero! He laughingly cried out. There was a sound of applause and cheering from the surrounding houses. The two men were suddenly aware that they were the center of attention. The sound of clicks from more than one Instamatic, and they knew there was going to be trouble from this one. The picture of Joe dressed only in his skivvies and t-shirt, cradled in Talbot's arms, was going to be too good to pass up, and no threats or cajoling would get them not to run the picture in the paper, probably on the front page. Joe wrapped his shirt around his waist to cover himself up and rushed home for a new pair of pants. I'll meet you at the hot dog hut, Joe cried as he disappeared. Talbot walked through the crowd, being cheered and patted on the back. Folks continued laughing as they went back inside. Talbot knew it was going to take a while to live this one down. On the way, he stopped off at the co-op for a bag of peanuts and to snack on after lunch. Joe showed up soon after, and Talbot ordered for both of them. Had their food waiting on an outdoor table. As they ate, they chuckled over the morning's events. Joe suddenly remembered that he'd have to go back and get his trousers off the tree later. Talbot wolfed down his dogs and opened a pack of peanuts. The bag split apart and the nuts spread all over the table and ground. Tossing the wrapper into the tray, he carefully opened the other. The sound of crunching rose from the ground. Looking down, several squirrels were enjoying the nuts and looking for more. They finished those they had gone onto the ground and clambered up onto the table. More squirrels soon joined them. Few paused and noticed a pack in Talbot's hand. He put them into a shirt pocket, but before he had a chance to securely button them, he was ambushed. Some climbed up his back and reached over his shoulder, while others went on for a frontal attack. Joe tried to remain serious, but it was a losing battle. Talbot remained still as the squirrels went into a feeding frenzy. They pulled at his shirt, plucking the nuts out as fast as they could. Some sat on his shoulders, munching in stereo in his ears, while others sat on his lap. It was Disney gone wild, and he was at the center of it. Some cameras could be heard clicking, and Talbot resigned himself that he was going to be photographed more today than he had been at his wedding. After lunch, they continued their walk. Seeing a school bus and several cars headed towards the lake, they speeded up in pursuit to see what was happening. The high school senior class was having a cardboard boat regatta. Talbot and Joe offered to assist. One of the teachers approached with several boxes and a roll of tape. Why not build a boat as well? You two against the class. Cheer went up from the students, who went into high gear. Talbot and Joe determined on the most let's try that again. Talbot and Joe determined on the most seaworthy way of constructing a boat that would last for at least one round of the lake. They decided on a double-hulled canoe style. This way, they could lose the outer shell and still finish the race. Class worked on one side of the bus, and with Talbot and Joe on the other. That way, nobody could use the idea of the other in case the other side had a better way of building. One of the teachers climbed up on top of the bus and was handed up a boombox and microphone. Teams were told to bring their boats to the edge of the lake. The students had created an outrigger against Joe and Talbot's canoe. A pair of paddles were handed to each team, and the boats were inspected. The boats were checked for any unfair quantity of tape, anything such as foreign objects like grass, leaves, or sticks, and that the construction was seaworthy. Both boats, having passed, were launched into the water and boarded. The students had 2 rowers, and the rest stood along the banks to cheer them on. Another teacher was taking pictures from ground level, and once the boats were safely in the water and underway, they climbed to the top of the bus for an overall view. Talbot and Joe started out in fine style. Their time together made them work in sync from the beginning. Students took a little while longer to be able to row in unison. At first quarter, Talbot and Joe were well in front, with the students struggling just to keep afloat and keep up. Nearing midpoint, the students lost one of their pontoons. It had filled with water and was causing them to list to port. The rolled cardboard was stripped from the side and the boat righted. The cast-off portion was slowly sinking into the depths. At midpoint, the sheriff's boat was slowly shedding its outer shell. The peeling portions slowed them down, and they frantically stripped the remaining pieces. Soon, seeing them working to remove the outer shell, dug deep and paddled into the lead. By the 3/4 turn, Talbot and Joe almost caught up, but were taking on water. The students passed the 3/4 mark with a second pontoon lost, and were also taking on water. By now, they were oaring smoothly, and if nothing further impeded them, they were sure to make it to the final marker, intact and quite possibly in first place. Joe was slowly sinking in the water, struggling to keep afloat. He slipped backwards into the water and stood with his paddle in hand. Thrusting the paddle inside beside Talbot, he got behind and pushed. Wading in the waist-high water, he felt panic rising as Talbot slowly sinking to the water. Realizing that all was lost, he stood to attention and saluted as Talbot went down with the remainders of the ship. Talbot rose, fluttering dirty water, and muttered a few dirty words quietly out of the earshot of the students, who reached the finish line just as the seepage rendered their boat unseaworthy, and they all sank into the briny deep. Talbot and Joe left on the shore and helped the rest of the class bring in the struggling students. Teams were awarded a first-place prize and towel apiece. Talbot and Joe were given a towel as well, and were included in the photograph for posterity of the first annual cardboard regatta. The Sentinel had people coming in for most of the afternoon with pictures and explanations. Stories were hastily written amongst almost continuous laughter, and the pictures readied for inclusion. Managing editor Nelson had them triple the amount they usually printed for the following day. Picture of Talbot holding Joel like an infant in his arms graced the first page. Other pictures of them were scattered throughout the paper. Nelson went personally to see Talbot and Joe to apologize for seeming to mock them. He explained that he held them in the highest respect, but there was no way he could pass up the opportunity. The two stalwart defenders of town acknowledged his difficulty and encouraged him to run the paper as he had it. The edition became the most popular ever printed, and copies were saved forever. Talbot and Joe had a good laugh at themselves and withstood the general ribbing with dignity and good humor. By the end of the day, a new panel was placed in the Historical Society on their section of pictures and notes. Talbot and Joe had a long list of accomplishments, but also a list of humorous escapades that the visitors enjoyed. All right, next one is small town law enforcement. So we'll be reading that on, what is it? I really got to get myself a calendar. Today is Tuesday. No, today's Friday. So we'll be doing this one on Tuesday. So I look forward to hoping you'll be here with me. Hope you enjoy these chapters, especially this last one, because I really enjoyed writing it. I think that's all I had to say. By the way, the reason I wrote about the cardboard regatta was because I actually did one, and that was with my major when I was in the Air Force. We did it at the club pool, and the exact thing happened. I was in the back, Major Wilson was in the front, and the boat made it all around the pool, but by the time we got back, I slid off the back and ended up in the water and ended up trying to push Major Wilson to get to the finish. So that one was from real life. So anyways, that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Tuesday. Help me. I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Be good to yourself. And if you can't be good, be careful. So take it easy. We'll talk to you again on Tuesday. Bye.